Hi, I'm Tom Batchelor, and I'm talking to Phillip Ullmann today about the role of central banks, the rise of digital currency, and why democracy is failing us. I hear you spend quite a few hours in Bible study. Perhaps you'd like to tell me a bit more about what that is and how it came about.
That's right. So I'm not esoteric. Don't have my head in the sky. I'm very pragmatic, but I've been looking for a solution to the problems that I face in the world is facing. And I always felt the answer was in the Bible. So after studying significant parts of Covenantal, I was fortunate enough to have the time available, and I contacted various world-class scholars, and now I spend the vast majority of every single day actually looking for solutions to the real-life problems in the Bible.
And the impression I got was that you've sort of not upset people quite, but because you've got a different perspective, you've turned some interpretations and some ideas on their head a bit. Tell me a bit more about how that's come about, because there's been a lot of you described it as a sort of protectionist view of how the text is viewed and how it functions, and you've tried to change those concepts.
Yes. So what we find in general is that certainly within the Jewish world, we've been subject to oppression for many years, many thousands of years, and up to and including, of course, the Holocaust. And that means we're naturally in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you look at the text through the lens of survival, and it doesn't open itself up. Fortunately, I've been blessed to be born in this country to be free to think and to be educated, and that allows me to look at the Bible with a completely different lens. And that's what's enabled me, with the support of these world-class scholars, to come up with a completely different vision, which actually shows that the Bible has solutions to all the problems. But if you're closed and you haven't been blessed with the freedom that we now have, you can't see the solutions.
And those solutions are about really taking the wisdom and the learnings and its value and applying that to everyday life. I mean, you've got quite a big agenda to take some of this conversation to an interfaith level where you know other religious leaders and community leaders can discuss your views together. I mean, is that the ambition here?
Yes. So to me, these ideas are world changing, and the only way I think you could really spread them is through trust. And the problem is, people don't really trust the market because that's using the power of money to force certain behaviors. People can't really trust the state because the state is about using the power of legislation to force behavior. The only real way of trusting is through faith.
I just wanted to go back to that idea of trust. And, you know, there's a lack of trust in the world. There's a lack of trust in our institutions, a lack of trust in how government operates. You think that can be changed?
Yes, I've given a lot of thought to the issue of trust, which is, as you say, I think the central issue to the institutions of society and relationships. So the state can't really be trusted because it's forcing behavior through legislation. The market is using the power of money to force behaviors. And I think we all realize if you're forced to behave in a certain way, you don't trust the person who's forcing that because you have no real choice. Choice is what creates trust. Mm-hmm. The beauty of faith is, when it's done correctly, is it's not forced upon anybody. It's a conscious choice. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what I've realized is if the ideas that are coming to us through biblical study are to be propagated and to transition the world, we have to do that on a platform of faith. Mm-hmm. We have to talk to people without faith because we have to be inclusive. Mm-hmm. But the trusted network that we build can be based around faith, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam. It doesn't matter. But we have to build, and I think trust and faith is the way we can propagate the message.
And what does progress look like? You know, you bring people together from different faiths. There's this interfaith dialogue. What's the objective there? What's a good outcome from your point of view?
A shared vision. We've got to stop fighting each other, and certainly Judaism and Christianity worked out killing and forcing behavior isn't the right answer. Islam is on that journey as well, and the vast majority believe it, but there are some extremes that are still using the power of killing. So the idea is to collaborate, to create a covenantal model whereby we confederate. So I think the way we do it is each religion becomes a federation, i.e. a set of laws and beliefs and values that are appropriate for that nation, but we create a confederation. The way we interface with each other is not by forcing our beliefs on others, but confederating. And that's a very powerful model. The difference between federation and confederation is very important.
Mm-hmm. I want to pivot a little bit because, we were chatting a little while ago about democracy and, whether democracy is really working. And I did note that sort of 20 years on from, the Iraq War, one half of the world at that point was democratic. Now, apparently today, only 1/3 of the world is democratic. So clearly the democratic model is failing. And you've got some quite strong views around whether even America, can be viewed as a democracy given sort of how it operates.
How can it be democratic where the 1% are accumulating the wealth and the 99% are suffering? That can't possibly be democratic, because if you voted for it, you wouldn't vote for that anyway. So Aristotle, I think it was, who said that there has never really been a proper democracy. It always becomes an oligarchy where the powers form small groups of very concentrated power, and then it's not democratic anymore. So I don't think there's any democracy in the world as far as I see it. And that's the problem, because when you're using the power of the state or power of the market, that's forcing behavior. And the answer is we have to become democratic. And that, I think, happens when we start trusting each other. And I think that the world that we live in with the technology lends itself to genuine transparency and democracy. We just haven't worked it out yet.
I mean, you talk about the power of the market and the power of government. Certainly in the latest banking crisis, we saw both of those come into play in quite a significant way. But you don't believe that the central bank agenda is necessarily as straightforward and concerned as it appears to be. What's your sense of their agenda and what they're really trying to do?
It's mysterious. I mean, we've had a period of low interest rates or zero interest rates for many years. And suddenly, in a very short space of time, the Fed leads the way, and then the European Central Bank starts to move interest rates up to a crazy level of 4 to 5%, which they know is going to destroy the economies. I mean, it's not rocket science, because every single decision that businesses make or individuals make was made assuming that interest rates were going to stay low. And therefore, there's a conscious decision almost to crash the system. It's crazy, but I think that's what's going on, because there's a recognition that the system is broken. So I think the central banks, for example,
to crash it is to then bring
something
reform,
new,
and that reform is the digital currency.
Correct, absolutely.
Which is being billed as something that's a positive, transparent change,
and should be and is. But that's fundamentally what I think is going on. There's a recognition that we've printed too much money, which is causing crazy amounts of inflation. And what that has done, if we look at not just consumer price inflation, but also asset price inflation, that's very confusing, because people think asset price inflation is good, because my house is worth a lot more. But it's not, when you work out that, in fact, the purchasing power of that money is less, and in fact, it's only going to the people with assets. So we've got inflation. Inflation is a crime against humanity. It is really damaging, whether it's asset price inflation or consumer price inflation. And so effectively, we're in a state where we're actually between a rock and a hard place. And I think the central banks know that. So they know there's a massive need for a reset. And then you get Andrew Bailey saying, yes, there's nothing to worry about. But by the way, I'm going to look at the FSCS compensation scheme and work out how
just to be clear. So at the moment, the £85,000 in your account is guaranteed by government. They want to change that and change it to push the numbers up. Similarly, in America, something else is happening, which suggests that the situation is not as secure as we're being told. In fact, far less than secure, more fragile than ever.
It's worse than that, because the whole scheme is not robust. The FSCS is a scheme that's not the government guarantee. It's a separate fund that's guaranteed. And that fund is allegedly supposed to be financed by the banks. They only charge a fraction of 8%. So there's no accountability, and there's nothing, virtually nothing in that fund to deal with a systemic collapse. And therefore, it's not, at the moment, it's not government guaranteed. In America as well, the FDIC is also allegedly a funded scheme. So what's happening is you get complete lack of accountability. The banks don't pay the insurance because they're paying 0.5%, and then it ends up, all of us via the state end up bailing out the banks. So the whole system is completely corrupt. And when you get the head of both the Fed and the Bank of England saying we've got to look at this this insurance scheme, but don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. There's obviously a lot to worry about. Otherwise, we wouldn't be looking at it.
There is a worry. But just going back to the idea of digital currency, I mean, your sense is that there's going to be quite a big push to perhaps put that digital currency into play, but not necessarily in a way that's going to be helpful to people. It's going to be a means of control from the centre and a way of tracking everyone's behaviours, perhaps, but not necessarily in the most helpful way. But how? Comments on that first, and then we'll talk about digital currency.
Yeah, so I think digital currency is a fresh start. It's the only way of doing it. I'm not talking about blockchain and Bitcoin. I'm talking about digital currency, which is effectively what bank money is. What we don't realize, and we get confused, we think that the central banks actually create the money in the system. The answer is they don't. 97% is digital money created by the banks. And that is crazy because it's a crazy model because the banks are private institutions that have no accountability to anybody, really. So the model of moving away from private money focused on a set of values, which is greed and selfishness. And if you look at what the money that's being created is being used for, it's about 45% for financial assets, for real estate, I should say, 30% for financial assets, stocks and shares. All of that is inflationary. 10% is effectively consumer price inflation. Only a small percentage, about 10% that's left, is actually really being lent for the true purpose of employment and meaningful industry
development. Yeah.
So effectively, the money should be moving away from private institutions to a more accountable system. The answer that the Fed and the ECB are coming up with is a single currency, which I think is right. But that is almost a single ledger because I think we need to see what's going on throughout the system so that nobody's left behind. The mistake is to centralize the actual control because that's the mistake that I've talked about in terms of the power of the market, the power of the state. We've got to distribute responsibility.
And that means a rethink on what the digital currency sort of roadmap would look like. And you think it should be much more community-based affair?
Yes.
Where just talk me through that model because it's a different idea where the currency could potentially profile those with greater needs and then help them in everyday life.
Correct. If you look at the success that China has achieved over the last 40 to 50 years, a lot of that is driven by the fact that they distributed power to thousands and thousands of local lending institutions, which means that they've effectively industrialized and we've deindustrialized. So what they got right was the distribution of lending. So money creation is very important, but it can't be centralized. So you want a single vision, a single set of transparency, but you distribute that responsibility to what we call civic trusts, which are effectively organizations focused on the needs of people of planet that are working locally and accountable to citizen assemblies. Now that effectively is redefining what money is. Money at the moment is about greed, it's about ego, it's about the self. If you start to think about money as a means of meeting the needs of others, then that changes the whole system, and therefore that can only be achieved with money that starts again. And I think that's a digital currency. And I think the power is, and it's happening. If you look at CDBC, all over the world, suddenly everybody's looking at CDBCs, which are central bank digital currencies, which I think is right. But the key is this is a point in time we can debate how that operates and how we can start to distribute responsibility away from the center on a single ledger, but towards local institutions accountable to the local population.
And all of it sort of operating in the locality. Local businesses can look to get local loans. It will be about the locality running itself.
And even better, we start moving back towards the family. So back in biblical times, there were agrarian family businesses. Now, that's what we need to move back towards, to family businesses. In fact, the majority of businesses, even now, are family businesses. Why? Because you can start to build trust outwards from the family. So we have to start to focus on lots and lots of smaller family concerns. It's more robust, working in a completely transparent environment. And that is game-changing. So you distribute power to civic trusts in terms of the creation of money. The new money is about the values of trust, fairness, and virtue, which we can discuss if you want. And
I did want to touch on those, because that's the very sort of covenantal idea.
Yes, so the set of values are trust. The first thing is that what we need to build on trust. Trust is missing. And as I explained earlier, the only way of changing the world is rebuilding that trust. And so trust is at the heart of the transition. And then the next bit is fairness. Now, in Hebrew, we call this tzedek and mishpat, but I've translated this into English phrases to make it easier. But fairness is about doing no harm. It's about making sure that you actually don't, for example, create unemployment. You don't create inflation. You don't charge interest on a loan. All of these things are extractive. So the fairness is do no harm to others. And the third value is virtue, which is look after others, care for others, meet the needs of others before your wants. And that's completely building society where money is about meeting everyone's needs. And you start to recognize that you don't need to accumulate billions of pounds in the way the current system works, because that doesn't achieve anything. We've got to start to make sure that everybody's looked after. And that's about virtue. It's about doing good, being a good person. And in terms of the question that we've discussed before, well, how will people be motivated? Because once they've got enough money to look after their family, they'll be using those resources to look after communities, to look after societies. I'm not talking about equality in terms of everybody having the same amount of money. That would be absurd. But if you're acting as a trustee, you're looking after society, you'll be trusted with more, but as a trustee within a civic trust. And that model is immensely powerful.
And obviously, you'll stand or fall by your ability to serve the community appropriately, and to make it work. And
you'll get recognition.
Others will thrive because of it.
People want recognition. The mistake we make is we think you need to have a huge number in your bank account. The answer is, if you're a trustee, you can, and you use it for the benefits of others, you will be trusted with more, but it's not yours. It's there for the benefit of society.